Well, the coronavirus, market meltdowns, First Minister's meeting coming up, another busy day and a busy week to come in this country. Let's bring in our panel of parliamentary journalists. Susan Delacourt is a columnist with the Toronto Star. Joël-Denis Bellavance is the parliamentary bureau chief for La Presse. And John Ivision is a columnist for the National Post and parliamentary bureau chief for Postmedia. Good to see you all again.
See you.
Wow, I mean, it's, you know, we started kicking this around before we start here. Where do you start with all of this? But let me frame it this way. Look at what's fallen in the lap of this Prime Minister and this government again, and let's start there. How big of a week is this for the Prime Minister and his government?
This is huge because they all cascade into each other. You know, I've in my mind I've developed a mnemonic for them. It's been sort of ABC through this year: air crash, blockades, and now coronavirus. And I'm dreading what the D is. Is it the drop in
depression? Maybe
depression. But yeah, it's this is huge, and they are all interrelated. And the frustrating thing, I'm sure, for government, for Canadians as well, is that you don't know where this is going. You know that, and there's not much you can do to stop it. We've had the first death. Wild question. I was up at question period today. We had the first death in Canada. Since Friday, we've had locally transmitted cases as well. The numbers still aren't huge, and but the panic is out there. Yeah. And if people aren't panicking about getting the virus, they're going to be panicking about the results of the virus.
Yeah, if you weren't panicking about your own circumstance and health concerns, that you know, if you watch what was happening on the stock markets today, oil prices, you're concerned. JD, what do you think?
Well, the cascade of events that we've seen over the last 24 hours is bringing a lot of headaches to the Prime Minister because he's got to manage this, but also the Finance Minister, Bill Morneau, who has to table a budget, and he has to go back to the drawing boards and redo basically his budget because of the current situation with the price of oil dropping. And it is affecting many regions of the country, particularly Alberta and Saskatchewan, but also Newfoundland and Labrador. They rely a lot on the price of oil for their own revenue. So it is, you know, and the government was hoping that after the crisis we've seen with the air crash, the coronavirus, and the blockades, that the budget would finally turn the page on those crises and bring good news and bring them back focus on their agenda. Well, guess what? It's not happening.
Yeah, what do you think as you're watching this, John?
Well, I think to some extent, the question was about Trudeau, how big a week is it? I think he gets a little bit of a pass from the electorate who know that it is a global crisis and that sovereign governments have only got so much that they can do. At the same time, it seemed curious to me that he was not present today and didn't come out and say something, you know, to reassure Canadians, because, you know, I think people are.
He was at a couple of different events today related to International Women's Day.
But he was in Ottawa this afternoon. He could easily have been in question period, it seems to me. And I think that people do want to hear that the government is there as the sort of lender of last resort, as the backstop when it comes to spending money on healthcare if we need that kind of extra expense. If I were him, I would have been talking to Canadians today.
That's an interesting comment from John. I bring back to the last big crisis we saw, you know, financially with the 2008-2009 crisis, and Jim Flaherty, the finance minister, was there to reassure Canadians almost on a daily basis. We're okay, we're going to do fine, we're going to go through it, we're going to take the necessary measures to calm people. And you also had Mark Carney as the Bank of Canada governor, who was also playing a role in this. We don't see that kind of same presence from the government in this beginning of a new crisis.
And we have the opposition parties today, or certainly the Conservatives, the official opposition, making the case that, look, everybody knew there would be a shock to the economy. We just didn't know what, because shocks to the economy happen. And you've been spending essentially like mad sailors for years, and here it is. And this jeopardizes the whole fiscal framework. Is there much validity to that?
I was surprised actually at the Conservatives' line of questioning today in the House. I actually went up there to see what the mood would be. And the fact that they went on, they weren't talking very much about the virus. They weren't talking about the stock market collapse specifically. They seemed to be using the day to just say, look, we told you so and you were awful already. Which I think it was more of a partisan tone than sort of what we're discussing. Where are you? What are the specifics about what is going on right now?
They're trying to make the case that a Conservative government would have been in a much better position to respond to this. But
Yeah, but that doesn't really answer any Canadians' practical questions about what is going on here and what could be done and what the Conservatives want the government to do now.
They do have a point, though, in that we've been 4 years of deficit spending. I mean, it's only relatively modest compared to the size of the economy. It's about 1.2% of the economy. We went to 3.5% in 2008, 2009. Deficits of around about 50 billion. But it does reduce the wiggle room. I mean, clearly, if you're $28 billion in deficit already, you can't spend. Well, you could spend another 50.
And we heard earlier in the program from economist Ian Lee saying, look, if this lasts and deepens, they've hung their hat on the whole debt to GDP ratio argument. He said, well,
that's gone already.
That is in serious trouble.
That's gone already.
And then what's the argument?
Even the last fiscal update showed that had gone. So I think Canadians were relatively sanguine about deficits when they thought deficits were under control, and the way that the government communicated they were under control was that the deficits in relation to the size of the economy were gradually going down.
Right.
Well, they're not anymore.
And the prescription that the Conservative Party is calling for, that may be more damaged than anything else, because they want cuts to the government. And when you're in a crisis now, usually the government tries to spend to stimulate the economy or try to limit the damage. But if you bring more cuts to that, today the word R, recession, was pronounced many times by the Conservative Party. So is this about to be pronounced as well by the Finance Minister?
We've seen Conservative governments in recession, and they spent it more than anybody. So I don't think anybody's
There was a
cutting.
good exchange about that in the House today with John.
Let me move down the road. We'll see where the week takes us. But we have a First Ministers meeting coming at the end of the week, and First Ministers meetings, they can go sideways in a hurry, which is why Stephen Harper never wanted to do them. Right? I mean, it's hard to control that agenda. And as much as I think going into this meeting, the government would have they knew they have to talk about health transfers to the provinces that want more money. They know they had to talk about, opening up the rules for the fiscal stabilization fund. But they probably were heading into this meeting thinking there's a way to manage this so that we don't, give away the bank. Have they lost control of that conversation now too, given the week we're going to see? Look, the provinces are going to make the case. Look what's happening around us. We need more money for health transfers, and we need to top up. Alberta's going to come to this meeting having taken another whack in the chin with oil prices. It makes you wonder if they're going to just get everything they ask for and walk away.
They've already lost control of the timing of this meeting. This meeting, remember, was supposed to take place in February. And I think all of us, when we were doing our year ahead things, were saying it was going to be the first big test of Justin Trudeau. Little did we know that there would be many others. So already this thing has been kicked down the road, and the timing has been changed because of the blockades. I'm still waiting to see, are they going to set an example by traveling themselves across the country when Canadians, by the end of this week, you don't know whether big gatherings like a First Minister's gathering are a good idea if we're telling people not to gather.
Right.
So,
well, it might be to the advantage to just have the First Ministers in a room and not the 300 people who come with them.
Or
right?
maybe just have them on the phone.
Yeah, or just have them on the phone.
Yeah, but I think it is going to turn into something all of us have seen lots of times before. It's going to be a health care. And remember, the premiers, they all came together with their list of demands, the Council of the Federation last year, and healthcare was the
Number one.
top issue.
Yeah.
So
shelve the National Pharmacare Plan. Just start by giving us more money.
So we're going to see
the escalator
that.
from 3% up. I think it's 5.2. They want the escalator up to.
One of the top priority of the government was to talk about climate change and the climate change policies that they want to bring forward, but that would probably take a back seat to other demands, the economy, which is might be hurt by what's happening, but also the demands of the provinces in terms of increasing healthcare transfers. So the agenda that the government wanted to put forward at that meeting, the federal government, the Trudeau government, is out the window right now.
John, what do you think of it?
Well, it just feels increasingly like this government is a cork in a torrent going down a stream. It just seems to be buffeted by one thing or another, and whatever the agenda was that they wanted to impose, it's just been totally derailed.
Let's finish on this.
That's cheery.
I hesitated to say, not to be too, climate change may be important again, because we might all be living in tents, but no. Let me talk about Aaron O'Toole. Interviewed him earlier on the program. What do you think of the kind of campaign he's running compared to what he did in 2017, Susan?
I was fascinated last week with the Jason Kenney endorsement. And the reason, maybe it's because I was around here then, but I want to know the story of what was the falling out between Jason Kenney and Peter MacKay, because Jason Kenney's letter was very specific about things he did not like about Peter MacKay, and that Aaron O'Toole is now carrying the torch for that side, tells an interesting story of Liberal-like divisions, sort of Martin Chrétien-like divisions.
It makes you wonder whether there was some head-butting around a cabinet table about
well, I think it
money for different regions.
No, I think it goes back to the 2006 convention, where remember there was the kerfuffle about how we picked the next leader.
Right.
Both these guys thought they could be a good bet they're in the running, and Kenney wanted the one member, one vote, and
Peter MacKay insisted on having all ridings treated equally, or else.
And I think if you remember back, there was some bad blood around that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But Aaron O'Toole is behaving right now as a person who is chasing the top prize, and you could see by the way he responds to media questions, but also the kind of people he's attracting. In Quebec, for example, he managed to get Alupa Clark, who is a former Conservative MP, was defeated in the last federal election, but he is seen as a sort of a nationalist Tory blue. And so this is interesting. This is a development that happened over the last 2 weeks before Mr. Kenney announced his endorsement of Mr. O'Toole. So he's acting like he's talking a lot to the base, acting as a person.
He's clearly tacking right from some of the things we'd heard from him. He insists he's not, that he's always believed these things, but I never heard him say.
Even notwithstanding clause?
I don't ever recall him saying that if he were running, in charge of the country, he'd be using the notwithstanding clause. But
yeah, it's interesting how many, and again, Liberals have found this in divisive leadership contests, how many crumbs you leave out there for the opposition to pick up in a federal election. You know, that you can replay ads over and over again from leadership debates, as we've seen, and how nasty and divisive this race gets, and how that plays in a future election are going to be interesting things to watch.
And it's funny because right now in this race, Mr. O'Toole is more to the right of the center. Whereas in 2017 when he ran, he was saying that he was like a Brian Mulroney type of conservative. Right. Well, this is what Peter MacKay is actually. So,
well, we'll see. All right, thank you all.
Thank you.